We are so pleased to welcome Brigid Kemmerer, the New York Times best-selling author of Dark and Alluring young adult novels, Your Curse So Dark and Lonely, and the newly released Defy the Night. Curse So Dark and Lonely, one of my all-time favorite YAs. If you haven't read it, please pick up a copy. And the new one, Defy the Night. Okay. So Defy the Night is a fantasy set during a pandemic, which feels very relevant to where we are in the real world now in 2021. Did you write your book as a way of dealing with all the chaos that was going on in the last year? Or had you already come up with the idea before we had our own pandemic?
So Defy the Night was fully drafted and written and turned into my editor by October of 2019. Pre-pandemic, nothing to do with the pandemic. I really started writing the book because I love outlaws. I loved like Robin Hood. I loved, has anybody ever read Jackaroo by Cynthia Voigt? You all need to read it. It's so good. So good. So good. Actually, Cynthia Voigt is really known. Does anybody know who Cynthia Voigt is? Am I feeling ancient right now? Okay. Cynthia Voigt is really known for like hard-hitting YA contemporaries and a little lesser known for her YA fantasies. And it's so bizarre. I'm thinking back now, like how many of her books I've read, and now I'm like, oh, I write contemporaries and fantasies. But she has this great fantasy series, and I love Jackaroo, and it's very much, masked outlaws. And I love stories like that. I love Zorro, and I really wanted to take all of that and pour it into my own YA fantasy. And I was trying to think, what kind of storyline did I want? Did I want, boy main character, girl main character? What wrongs are they going to right? And I was scrolling Facebook and I saw somebody had shared a GoFundMe for a neighbor who didn't have money to continue paying for cancer treatments. And I was like, that is kind of what I want to tackle in this fantasy, like a world that is kind of built where there's not enough medicine to go around, there's not enough money to buy the medicine that exists, and to really take a look at things from that direction. And it was interesting when I turned the manuscript into my editor, and then I started writing A Vow So Bold and Deadly, which is the third book in the Curse Breaker series. And my editor was like, "We need that book. Let's go. Come on, Brigid, read it." And even when she sent me my first edit letter for Defy the Night, she said, "Don't read this." It was January of 2020. And I was on tour for A Hearts and Fears and Broken. And she was like, "Do not read this edit letter right now. Put it like in your email inbox and save it until Vow is done." And I did not open that email or go through that edit letter until April of 2020. And we were deep in the pandemic. It's fascinating to read that edit letter because I still remember there was a line either in the manuscript notes or in her letter that was something like, "We don't know how people would act in a full-scale epidemic population." And I'm like, but now we do.
So Adrienne Young, who wrote Fables, said that Defy the Night blends magic with politics with a deft hand, which I would totally agree with. Tell us a little bit about the political situation that's going on with Prince Corrick and his brother.
So in the book, we have King Harriston. I know, I love Fable. I'm in the middle of it. It's so good. So in Defy, we have King Harriston, who came into power because his parents were assassinated. And then his younger brother is Prince Corrick, who is kind of thrust into this role called the King's Justice, which is basically like the court executioner. He doesn't actually kill anybody, but he's the one to issue the order of punishment. And the reason that they are so brutal is because their kingdom is overrun by this illness, and there's not enough medicine to go around. And the political system was. My husband makes fun of me because he's like, "Honey, you hate politics. Why did you write a political novel?" And I'm like, "Because I could do it however I wanted. That's what's fine." And I wanted to make the political system a little bit more complicated. Normally in fantasy, you have the king at the end, right? But King Harriston has different sectors that are each kind of governed by a council. And he is a little bit beholden to these councils. You know, he has laws in place where they can each rule their sector, and there's only 2 sectors that have access to this medicine. So of course now that there's this illness ravaging the kingdom, these are the 2 most powerful sectors. And it did make things really complicated. For the first time in my life, I had to work an Excel spreadsheet of who rules what area, who has the money, and you know, where is everyone, what are the names of these sectors. I drew a map, which was really helpful later when my editor said, we're going to hire someone to do a map. It's Virginia Allen. It's beautiful. It's just a gorgeous map that's inside the cover. And my editor was like, oh, you drew one. Can you send it to me? And I was like, it's literally a flip-flop that I drew like lines through to designate the sectors.
So your main character is Tessa. And so the only remedy for the illness in the book, as you mentioned, are these moonflower leaves. Why does Tessa feel such a weight of responsibility on her shoulders that she's willing to make these perilous trips to steal these leaves? And that's not giving anything away. It's pretty much in the beginning of the book that this happens. But she just has felt like she had so much weight on her shoulders in the beginning.
So I think some of it, you know, for Tessa, she saw her parents get killed for doing exactly, and this again is all revealed in the very first chapter of the book. She saw her parents get killed for doing what she is now doing. And she wants to live up to her parents' memory. You know, she wants to do what she feels is right. You know, Tessa's really very earnest and principled and knows what she wants to do, knows, you know, the kind of person that she wants to make. And I think that's why she is willing to risk herself to do what she can do to protect people.
So let's talk a little bit about my favorite character, who is Weston Lake, who is, I would have to say, and you will all agree with me, quite swoon-worthy.
Hi, Wes.
And you can get a character card with the book. And he has a secret that I'm not going to reveal, but honestly, it just changes everything. And it's one of those secrets that you're reading along and you go, and you literally just sit up if you're, you know, you're lying in bed and you're like, oh wow. So what was the inspiration for his character?
I had written, a bunch of really angsty boys in all of my contemporaries, and then, Prince Ren in the first Breaker series, like, dude, someone needs to hug you. And he's no harm done. Like, Ren, shut up. If you've ever seen Interview with the Vampire, the movie, there's like at the very end. Again, I'm making myself seem really old. At the very end, Tom Cruise is Lestat, the vampire, and he's like listening to Louis like on the tape, and he's like, "Quit whining, Louis." And I'm like, "Oh, that's Ren." Yes. No, but I love Ren. He's my favorite character to write. But so I've written all of these like angsty, brooding boys, and I was like, no, I just want to write somebody who's having fun and feeling just plucky and daring and very much this roguish character, and that's kind of where Wes came from.
So do you start writing books with a plot you can't stop thinking about, or is it a character who just pops into your head and won't leave? Or maybe you think of a fabulous ending and you try to figure out how to get there. Just tell us how your books come together.
So this morning I was watching TikTok. Very professional. And I'm sorry, I was drafting my novel, Phoebe, if you take that back to Bloomsbury, which was hard at work, watching TikTok. And there was a TikTok of this girl who was talking about how she would write a book, and she had like 4 packs of Post-it notes, and she would take very detailed notes and like outline what her plot was and outline each character, and she would like make little stacks on her wall and things like that. And the whole time I'm watching this TikTok, I'm like, this is my brand of hell. And it's just never. I have a very loose idea of the plot that I want, or the story that I want to tell. I will generally have my major plot points. I will generally have an idea of what I want the climax of the book to be, and I will always have a really solid idea of who I want my main characters to be. I love characters. I I would put characters in a room and just have them argue over groceries and be happy about it. You know, so for me, it's always characters first and a loose sense of plot. And I like to discover a lot of side characters and side plots as I write.
So A Curse So Dark and Lonely is a fairy tale retelling of Beauty and the Beast. Do you think you'll ever do another fairy tale retelling? And which one?
I mean, maybe. So I've always said that I wanted to do the Little Mermaid in some way, either like gender swapped or just something different. And then one day my agent was doing Instagram stories and like taking questions from writers, and somebody, you know, asked what you think of mermaids, and she just went on this rant about how she hates mermaids and they don't make biological sense, and you know, how they eat, where does it go? Like she's like, they're just disgustingly weird, and I hate mermaids. And I'm like, okay, so we're just gonna shelve that idea. You know, and I know a lot of people have, because I've seen online, a lot of people have called, you know, Defy the Night a Robin Hood retelling, which was never my intent. You know, like I definitely see the parallels with the Outlaws and things like that. But it's not really a Robin Hood retelling. But yeah, it would be the Little Mermaid. I'm gonna do it and make my agent sell it. Sorry, Susie, this is all I'm writing. I'm sorry.
We all want to read that, of course. Have you finished writing the sequel to Defy the Night? Is it a duology, or is it going to be a trilogy? Or don't you know?
It's planned as a trilogy. If my editor is watching this, I am nearly done with the first draft of the sequel. But for everyone who wants a real answer, I'm not nearly done with the sequel. But it's in progress.
So every writer's publishing journey is so different, and I'm always interested to hear how writers got to where they are now. So how did you get your agent, and did your first book sell? Tell us your story.
So I'm 13 books deep now, and so I don't want to make this a super long story, but I will tell you, I barely remember getting an agent. That's terrible. My first book did not sell. My first manuscript, you know, got rejected all over the place. My first real manuscript where like I had done the work to find out like how do you write a query letter and all those kinds of things. And I remember there was an agent back in 2000, 2007, 2008, who was a secret agent, and she kept a blog. I forget, oh, Miss Snark, okay? And I loved that blog. It was very snarky, it was very funny, and it was kind of like a secret that Janet Reed was the one who kept that blog. So I loved Janet Reed. I like stalked her. I actually went to a conference she went to, not stalked her in a criminal sense, in a loving sense. And I went to, you know, this festival that she was going to be at, and like I remember I ended up standing next to her in line, and I was like, pitch your book, Brigid, pitch your book, pitch your book, pitch your book. And she like turns around and she's like, do you have a tissue? And I was like, no, I don't. And she was like, okay, thanks. And that was missed my chance. And I remember I sent her a query letter with this manuscript, and she wrote back almost immediately and asked for, and I didn't send her the manuscript, I sent her the query letter, and she wrote back almost immediately and said, I like the sound of this book. Can you send me the full manuscript? And that, like, if you are a querying author, that is a big deal for an agent to come back and say, I want to read the manuscript. That is like the next step. And my oldest son was maybe 6 months old at the time, and I sent her the manuscript at like 6 p.m. Remember, it was right around dinner time. I was still working full time. And at 2 a.m., my son woke up to nurse. He was still a baby. And, you know, as I'm sitting on the couch, feeding my baby, I pick up my BlackBerry. That's how old the story is. I pick up my BlackBerry to check my email. And there's an email from Janet Reed. And it was a rejection email. And it was like, and I still remember to this day, the very first line was, hey, Brigid, there's no plot here. And yeah, and yes, and I sat on that couch and cried. So you can imagine, you know, I'm gotta get up at 5 in the morning to go to work. I'm feeding my baby, and here my dreams have been crushed in this email. But it was okay. It was a good email. She said a lot of really kind things about my writing, most of which were starting her. And but in a good way, So the next morning, I said to my husband, I'm going to shelve this manuscript and I'm going to start something new. And I started writing a totally new book, which was this paranormal romance about the son of Apollo, the Greek god Apollo, being exiled from the land of the gods and, taking up residence in the city of Baltimore, teaching music lessons. And he meets this girl who can kind of like see through all of his illusions and sees that there's something magical about him. And I was so excited about this book. I remember, if any of you are writers, it was like 140,000 words long. And I was like, I need all of those words. I need them all. No one needs that many words. No one ever needs that many words, except for Tycho's book coming in next May, because that's how long that one is. But anyway, at the time, I thought for sure that I needed it. And I sent it out and I got rejected by everyone so many times, like 100 different rejections, except one agent said she really liked the manuscript and wanted to represent me. And I was on cloud nine. I remember I got the call at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I drove home from work way too fast. My husband took me out to dinner and then he drives me around the fancy neighborhood, where all the mansions are. And it's like, we're gonna have one of these houses one day. We still do not have one of those. And I was so excited that this manuscript was going to be the one, and then that book did not sell. And I went on to write another book that was about these 4 brothers who can control the elements of earth, air, fire, and water. And that manuscript was rejected by a bazillion editors, but that one did ultimately sell. It became my first published book. That was Storm, came out in 2012. And then from there, it has just, I don't know, now I feel like the grizzly old lady who has to sit at the side of the bar, with a cigarette, want to talk about publishing.
So did the manuscript with 140,000 words, did you send it out on submission with all those words, or did you cut some of them?
We got it down to 125. I got it down to 125. But it never sold. Yeah, it was just rejected by everyone. And now looking back, I can see everything that's wrong with it. And people are always like, no, you should just publish it. It's fine. It's not YA. It is not YA.
Now we really want to read it.
Actually, right now might be the perfect market for it.
It would.
Right. How many chili peppers? I watch way too much TikTok. Next question.
Moving on. So what's your favorite YA novel that you didn't write?
Oh, that's not fair. I love An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir. That is almost always my go-to recommendation. I truly love that book. I loved it when I read it. I couldn't put it down. I also love Kiss of Deception by Mary Pearson. And Stephanie Garber recommended that to me. We did an event together last year, and she recommended it and would not stop talking about how amazing it was. So I was like, all right, I need to read this book. I read the entire trilogy, 1,500 pages in less than 2 weeks. And I have 3 little kids and a deadline. So for me to read that much, even my husband was like, why are you getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning? I'm like, shut up, I can read this book. It was so good. And I wouldn't stop talking about it. And I'm bizarrely friends with Jodi Picoult, and Jodi, because I had said something about it on Instagram, and she texted me and she was like, did you really like that book? Was that BS? And I'm like, no, I really loved it. If I talk about a book on social media, I truly do love it. So she started reading it. So now she's texting me repeatedly, wait, which one is which? Which one is which? For those of you who haven't read Kiss of Deception, it's told the point of view from this girl who's a princess, and she runs away from her arranged marriage. And she kind of goes to this small town to hide. And while she's there, these 2 people show up. These 2 different guys show up. And in the story, one is an assassin who's been sent to kill her, and one is a prince that was destined to marry her, but you don't know which one is which. And it is incredibly well done. And it's a really brilliant series, and I loved it. I loved it so much that I emailed Mary Pearson with shaking fingers. I was like, I love your series so much. Will you please read Defy the Night and give me a blurb? And then she did. So shoot those shots, friends.
So audience members, do you have any questions? If you ask your question, I will repeat it so that our friends online can hear.
I'll talk about anything.
Do you have any advice for aspiring authors?
Okay, advice for aspiring authors.
All right, so I would say, trying to think of anything that I haven't said a million times already. All right, probably my biggest one would be don't judge your rough draft against a finished book that's on the shelf. I don't think people realize, really until you're a published author, I don't think people realize how many rounds of revisions that books truly go through. You know, I might Defy the Night, we probably did 5 rounds of revision just with my main editor, and then it goes to a copy editor who, you know, checks all of your facts and your, you know, little details. Like if somebody has blue eyes on page 26, make sure they're not green eyes on page 324, things like that. And then beyond that, then it goes to, you know, a proofreader. You just have so many eyes on a manuscript before it makes it to the shelf. And even I find myself, you know, when I'm writing a rough draft, I'm like, this is crap. Like how, you know, no one is ever going to pay money for this. And you have to mentally push past that. And it helps if you're like, you know what, everything is garbage in the beginning. We all hate our manuscripts at some point. You know, anytime I complain to my husband, you know, I hate this book, it is awful, I'm never gonna be able to fix it. And he's like, let me look at the calendar, what day is it? I'm like, you know what, shut up. And you know, because we all do go through that. I would also say to read books that are kind of, not all the time, because I know we all have the things that we love, like that we're going to gravitate to, but I would say to read books that are kind of outside your wheelhouse from time to time, because it's fascinating how that can really, you know, break you free in your head. It's, you know, the Oatmeal did a comic once about how sometimes you spend so much time exhaling creativity that you didn't need to inhale somebody else's creativity. And if you do it in a different way from what, you know, you're exhaling, it sometimes just feels more full. And I loved that advice.
Anyone else have a question? Yes?
Do you plan on revisiting the Curse Breaker world at all?
Yes, that's a great lead-in question.
Okay, so let's repeat the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the question was, do I plan on revisiting the Curse Breaker world at all? And yes, in May of next year, Forging Silver into Stars is the first book in a new series set in the Curse Breaker world. It is set 4 years in the future from where About So Bold and Deadly led off. And it includes Tycho, who is now 19, and he is working as the King's Courier, and he rides between the Kingdom of Emberfall and the Queendom of Still Shallow, delivering secret messages. And then 2 new characters that no one has met yet, named Jax, who is a blacksmith, and Callan, who is a baker, and that's Jax's best friend. Sure.
Okay, more questions? Yes.
You need a diversion for your writing. What you like to do takes you away from it for a little while. Fresh.
So diversion from writing, to keep things fresh and new. So a great piece of advice somebody said once that I didn't learn until much later was that once writing becomes your job, you need to find a new hobby. And for me, that became weightlifting and CrossFit, which I know is weird. But I found it I started lifting weights and if anybody follows me on Instagram, I'm sure you've seen my 3 million videos. There's like a joke, how do you know somebody does CrossFit? Don't worry, they'll tell you. See, thanks for setting me up. No, but I discovered weightlifting when I was 39 years old. It was in 2017, and I just needed to do something. My husband and I needed to do something because I'd been working from home for a year. That was after I quit my day job. And I loved, because I was never somebody who would like sprint a mile. I still, to this day, if somebody was chasing me, I'm gonna be like, just take me down, it's fine. You know, but weightlifting, you know, let me focus really on being strong as opposed to being skinny or, you know, fit. And I just absolutely loved it.
Right here. Yeah.
If you could have dinner anywhere, like all expenses paid and stuff, with any author, alive or dead, who would it be and where?
Okay, if Brigid could have dinner with any author, anywhere, alive or dead, who would it be and where?
So what's funny is once I would have said Jodi Picoult, but we had dinner. On my birthday. we did an event together right before the pandemic. My world was like up here, and then the pandemic, you know, it was like for everyone. I don't know if he counts as an author, but I always want to say Lin-Manuel Miranda.
He counts.
Thanks. Okay, good. We'll keep that one.
And can I come along too?
Yes.
Okay, yes, in the back row.
So did you formally study creative writing? What college? What was like your first job at?
So my day job, I worked in finance. I worked for stock
I'm
brokerage.
gonna
firm.
repeat the question.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. Did you formally study creative writing in college?
No. You know, my first job, I worked in finance. I worked for a stock brokerage firm for almost 20 years. And I loved doing that. I loved math, I loved numbers, but I also loved stories and storytelling. The most amazing thing about writing is that there are no prerequisites whatsoever. You can be a published author with no writing background. Sometimes I will see people online say, you know, you need to get an MFA. You do not need an MFA. You don't even need a college degree. You know, there are many paths to publication and success. And when students ask me, what should I study if I want to be a writer? I always tell them study something that keeps you curious and keeps you interested and gives you the foundation to get a job that will help you pay the bills, because it is very, very scary trying to rely on being creative to make a mortgage payment, basically.
Who else has a question? Yes.
What is your favorite audiobook?
Oh, your favorite audiobook.
I don't listen to a lot of audiobooks, sadly. The last one that I remember listening to all the way through, oh man, I'm trying to remember what it was called. It was a memoir, but it was really good. It was the Carolyn Jessup story. I think it was called Escape. It was about this woman who escaped from a polygamous sect in Utah, and it was just fascinating. It was fascinating. But I don't listen to a lot of like fiction audiobooks because I don't know why, but my brain starts to drift. And then I'm like, wait, what? Yeah, so,
You probably, as a creative person, just pick up on an idea that the person was talking about in the audiobook, and you're like, wonder
Yes,
if I could
I just
fit
start
that
to drift.
into a book somewhere, and when you're reading a book, you can just put it down and think about what it is you want to think about. But the audiobook just keeps going. Yes.
Sorry, I have another question.
it's okay.
How many working drafts of random books do you have?
How many working drafts do you have?
So right now, because I'm doing 2 books a year, at any given time, I have a book that I'm drafting, a book that I'm revising, and a book that I'm promoting. But I can't draft 2 books at the same time. Yeah, I try to explain to my kids who love to interrupt me at any given time, especially when I'm like in the heat of the moment, like I could be writing a battle scene, and they'll go bursting into the room, stress crap out of me. And I try to explain to them, like getting into, you know, Storyland, wherever I am, like it's like mommy has gotten an airplane and flown, you know, across the country and, you know, gone through security and done all of these things to get there. And I'm like, when you guys burst into the room, it's like you yanked me back into this bedroom and I have to go through this whole procedure again to get back into that headspace, and they don't care. And but that's why it's really, really hard for me to work on 2 books at the same time.
So you're drafting one, writing one, and promoting one. So on this tour, how many cities are you going to promote?
Let's see. So I got Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Chicago, Baltimore, Miami, Denver, Portland, Raleigh, Winston-Salem, 9. Going to a lot of places.
Are you just are we at the beginning or?
We are at the beginning. This is my first week because the book just came out Tuesday.
Okay, great. Anyone else have a question? Yes, right here.
What was your biggest fangirl moment?
Oh, biggest fangirl moment.
So me fangirling on someone else or someone else fangirling on me?
Neither.
Okay. Wow, okay, so I've had a lot of, I'll tell you one with somebody on me. I've had a lot of poignant moments with readers, which is amazing, and especially some of my contemporaries are a little bit more heavy hitting. And so I'm gonna do a throwback to Letters to the Lost. Letters to the Lost was my first contemporary. Everything else had been, paranormal up to that point. And the book really heavily deals with grief and loss. And I don't even think the book had come out yet. It was still in galley form, advanced review copies. And I was doing an event, I think it was like Children's Institute, which is just a bunch of booksellers come. And nobody knew me, nobody knew who I was, hardly anybody had even read the book. And this woman came up to the table and she picked up my book and she said, I have to meet you. And she started crying. And it's gonna make me cry thinking about it, just as a mother. And she said, my husband, this is gonna make me cry. She says, my husband died 6 weeks ago and my daughter hasn't spoken to me. And I read this book and I gave it to her, like I left it in her bedroom and she read it. And it's the first time she talked to me since her dad died. And it was such, it's not a fangirl moment, but it was such a profound connection with someone for a book that I wrote by myself sitting in my house. And I think there is something so magical about just books in general that bring people together. Sorry, that was probably a heavier answer than you wanted.
I like it.
Thanks. I don't have like a good story, like I spilled a glass of wine on someone, or like, or like I couldn't speak. I do have a moment like that where I couldn't speak. So when I was growing up, I was raised in a very conservative Catholic household, like ultra conservative, went to, Catholic girls' school, was never allowed to listen to like any kind of racy music, whatever. I was allowed to read whatever books I wanted, which was amazing. And if my mom knew some of the books that I read when I was a teenager, like she would die. I remember once I bought Madonna, the Immaculate Collection, because my dad thought it was church music. Sorry, Dad. I was like, Dad, I think they're like church songs. I don't know. I like the cover. Such a rebel. Anyway, but I when I was around 21, so now I'm out of the house and in my good little Catholic girl self. Somebody told me that I should read Dan Savage's Sex and Vice column. And if anybody's familiar with Dan Savage, he writes this column that I loved then. And it wasn't just sex advice, it was really just being advice. And I loved his books, and that he's a gay man, he and his husband ended up adopting a baby, and he wrote a book about the adoption process, and I'm adopted, so I loved that book. And I ended up reading all of his books, and I read his columns for years. So I was a huge Dan Savage fan. And he came to Washington, D.C., like, 4 years ago, as part of his book tour. And I told a friend of mine who was a librarian, I said, you have to go, I have to meet him. I need to tell him like what his writing, like him being a writer, like was such an inspiration to me. And we got there and I waited in this super long line, and there was like a cocktail party and everything. And I got up, on the platform thing, and he's like, what's your name? I just could not speak. I was just so frozen. I couldn't say anything to him. And he's like, do you want to just write it down? So I wrote down Brigid, and he like signed the book. And I was like, I said nothing. And I was texting a friend of mine, another gay man, and because he was like, how did it go? Did you tell him everything you wanted to tell him? And I was like, no, we're not at this cocktail party. And he's at the other end of the room, and I completely missed my chance. My friend, his name is Jim Hildebrand, and I love him dearly. He's a banker. He got in a cab and came to the event and came upstairs and took me by the hand and like calls me up to Dan Savage. And he's like, I need to introduce you to my friend Brigid Kemmerer. And I'm like, so now I have a picture of me and Dan Savage at this book event, and it was amazing. I still could hardly speak to him. My friend Jen like did all the talking. It was awful.
Anyone else have a question? Yes, right here.
So you talked a little bit about where you get your inspiration from, scrolling TikTok or Facebook or life events, but when something pops into your head like that, how do you know it's an idea worth chasing or writing down or capturing?
So for me, it's all, if I know it's something worth chasing, it's almost always a character pops into my head. For Defy the Night, it was definitely Tessa. Tessa was the first, like I knew that I wanted to be a girl, and I knew I wanted her to be an outlaw. And sometimes I'll just think about that and chase that angle for a while, just in my brain. And I don't know, and I still have ideas in the back of my head of things that maybe I'll write one day, and it's okay for them to kind of live there. They're just not ready yet, which is fine. So I say any idea is worth chasing. Take your character, whoever you're thinking of, and say, okay, what would they do if, I don't know, somebody lit them on fire, or if somebody, chased them up to the edge of a cliff and they were like, do I jump? Do I, fight? What do I do? And, and you guys laugh, but I think that's really the core of writing, is really all what ifs. What if I do this to this person? What are they going to do? And see if there's a story there.
Yes, in the back.
So I have a question. Talk about your journey coming to New York Times Bestseller. From the time the book is completed, like you're talking, saying that you're on City Book right now, there must be an enormous amount to get to that.
So do you mean like from when my first book came out to when I eventually hit the New York Times, or do you mean?
No, the book that hit the New York Times. Once you completed the book, what was the journey like for you? What did you have to do? Press, or how did you look for those that you offered after?
So the my first book that hit the New York Times list was A Curse to Dark and Lonely, and that was my 9th published novel. And this book, I had started writing that book in 2012. My publisher at the time did not like the idea of portal fantasy. And they rejected it, which is fine. They were not the right publisher for that book anyway. And I remember at the end of 2015, I was looking to do, my next project, and my husband, was like, why don't you, find something fun, find something, that you really enjoyed writing. And I remember I'd started this manuscript and I pulled it back out, and that ultimately became A Curse of Dark and Lonely, and it sold to Bloomsbury. And by the time I finished the manuscript, it was probably early 2017. And from there, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, but not just the editing and things like that. They design a cover, and they start, developing the advanced review copies. I'm trying to think. The book came out in January of 2019, so it was probably early to midway through 2018 that we really started doing promo. And the publisher does a lot on the backside that I don't have anything to do with. They send it out to reviewers, they send it out to, now there's people on, Instagram and TikTok and all different kinds of places. But at the time, it was mostly like book blogs, different trade reviewers, things like that. And some of it is really nebulous and you can't control it. I got really good early reviews, which was amazing. And then in December of 2018, so before it came out, I got a message on Twitter from Jodi Picoult. And she's like, I love the sound of your book, can I read it? And I totally thought that somebody was like catfishing me or messing with me or whatever. And even my husband was like, no, honey, why would, and at the time, I didn't even know how to say her last name. He was like, why would Jodi Picoult send you a message on Twitter to read your book? Blue check mark. And I remember I called my editor and I was like, Jodi wants to read my book. And my editor was like, tell her yes. Tell her I will call her on the phone and read it to her out loud. So I sent it to her, and that I think also for me was a little bit of a turning point, because that was the first like big author who was like, I want to read your book. And I remember after she read it, she sent me a message and she was like, I really like this book, it's really good. And my editor was like, ask her for a blurb. And again, shoot those shots, friends. So I did. I emailed Jodi and I was like, I'm so glad you liked it. Could you give me a blurb? And she did. And of course, they put that on all of my promotional materials from that point forward. I think a lot of it was also very grassroots. Again, it was my 9th book. So I had built a readership up to that point. And I try to really respect my readers and who they are. And I've had readers follow me all the way since the Elemental series. Has anybody here followed me since the Elemental series? Thanks, Phoebe. You know, which is just amazing to me. And things have really grown from there. And there's really no magic formula, and I'm not the right person to ask, just because it's not common to hit the New York Times list with your 9th book. You know, sadly, publishing is one of those industries where the less experience you have, the more attention you get. You know, if you're a debut, everybody's like, yay! And I see it now, you know, again, jaded lady sitting at the side of the bar with a cigarette. I see it all the time with authors into their 2nd book. They're like, I'm just not getting as much attention as my 1st book did. It might be a failure. Like, no, you're just an author on your 2nd book. Like, I mean, it's sad. Like, you know, yeah, I'm sorry. That's probably not a really satisfying answer. I wish.
Yeah, that's a great.
Sure.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question.
Sure.
How do you deal with bad press or trolls?
So, you know, trolls I mostly ignore. I don't get on the internet and say a lot of inflammatory things. It's just not who I am as a person. And I don't like the stress that, you know, saying a lot of inflammatory things kind of could bring that stress back on you. And I know some authors really are very vocal online, and I have so much admiration for people who can do that, but I don't think I can handle the stress of that coming back. If people are weird, I either just block or delete. You know, bad press, you know, or bad reviews, you know, and they used to really hurt my feelings, but now, again, I'm 13 books deep. You could walk up to me and tell me to my face, your book is crap. And I'd be like, all right, let's get coffee. So, yeah, I know what we're not talking about, you know. Yeah, it's just one of those things that publishing, once it's out there, it's like a product. And I try to think about that, even if people email me directly, it's like, you know, somebody complaining about their vacuum cleaner, you know, I have to take it with a grain of salt.
Okay, I think it's time to sign some books.
Yay.
Thank you, Brigid. This has been so much fun.